Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Career Conversations. My name's Izal,
I'm Laura.
I'm Dakota.
and today we're going to continue on our interview prep series. On today's topic, we're going to focus specifically on how we actually practice for an interview and the types of questions that you want to prepare for at the end of every interview. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to focus on is actually how to prepare. I know we've talked about in other videos some research that you can do. We also described how to conduct a job description analysis. So hopefully if you've already done those things, we can utilize that information to then take it to the next step, which is practice. I make this analogy, and I don't know if it's a good one or an awful one, but I always feel like interviewing is kind of like a muscle. So the only way you get stronger at it is if you actually practice it. So it's great that we are doing all of these other pieces like research, but we then need to put that into practice so that way we can build up and strengthen that skill set so that we become much stronger in it. So we're going to focus on that. What are some suggestions? I know we all have probably our own personal preference of how to go about in practicing. What do you guys tend to gravitate towards when it's practicing on your own?
Um,
Dakota.
so for me, when I'm practicing for, an interview, I think it's always great to practice with, friends or family, whoever you live with, first, and just kind of start getting that, the way you want to talk, the way you want to move, all of that stuff kind of already going and practicing. And then it's always great to stop with career services and do another mock interview. So, you kind of have what you want to say and what you want to do already planned out before you even do a mock interview. And then once you're in the mock interview, you're going to get a lot more quality feedback because you're not worrying about all of those little things that you can practice at home. So I think that's the best way to get the most out of the mock interview is by practicing with friends and family first, getting their feedback, and then scheduling that mock interview and doing that. And then my last little tip for that is also practice well before your interview, and then right before the interview, the night before, don't even practice, don't even worry about it. Just try to like get it all out, all your nerves, because if you did the practice well before, then there's no reason that you should be doing it the night before and freaking yourself out. That's might be a personal thing for me. I think it's just easier to clear your head the night before and not worrying about it, because if you did all the prep before, you're going to be totally fine. So that's kind of my little tips. So
What about you, Laura?
So I always tell anyone that I'm helping to at least 2 days before your interview is to come to career services, make an appointment, because I feel like the 2 days it's like fresh in your mind, that you just the interviewing, the strategies that we go through, and that way any questions that we discuss in the appointment that you can do that the day before the interview, and then you can execute that the day of the interview. So if you've ever done a mock interview, or if you ever have the opportunity to do a mock interview, I think that you should definitely do that because that's going to help you, as Dakota mentioned. But there's a lot of strategies that go into it. I think for interviewing, and I think that when you kind of decide like what types of questions are going to be asked. When I do appointments, I always look at the job description and kind of determine what interview questions do we think might be asked because we don't even know. We can kind of guess based on the job description and then maybe some of the typical types of questions that are asked in an interview. But even then, we don't know. But I think the success of doing that is maybe 60 to 70% of the questions that are asked, you can answer them during the interview. So I always like to prepare that way and then do an actual mock interview because I feel like once you understand how to answer the questions when you do a mock interview, then you can be able to be a little bit more confident. And then we can talk about all the things that maybe that you're doing in an interview, in the mock interview, such as like fidgeting or not making good eye contact, or somehow you're answering the question because a lot of thought goes into interviewing. So I think that when you can do some interview strategies, determine the types of questions that might be asked, and then do a mock interview. I think those are the most effective strategies. Mm-hmm. And usually in an appointment, I'm sending homework with the person that has an interview, because I'm saying, okay, these are the questions might be asked. You need to write all your answers down thinking that these might be the questions asked. Because when you go into your interview, you're going to feel a lot more confident, knowing that maybe you know most of these questions and you'll be able to talk about yourself. So that's kind of my suggestion, is to do some interview strategies and then a mock interview. And then I think you will at least be confident in the interview when you get to that one-on-one or the group interview. Yeah. But determining what, if it's a group interview or one-on-one, that could also make a difference as well.
Mm-hmm. So what I heard from both of you is kind of like the verbal and nonverbal. So kind of practicing, right? So practicing with friends or family members, coming in and scheduling an appointment. I always tell people, as soon as you know you have an interview, like, call us and put something on the calendar. Because if we can get one mock interview, I know sometimes personally I've done more than one mock interview leading up. So the first one is kind of like anticipated questions. We'll talk about more in depth about like techniques or things that they need to work on. And if there's time, sometimes we can get that person back in and see improvement. Okay, you did this really well. You really grew in this. So that's super helpful. But we're kind of talking about that verbal, like how do we articulate what we're saying, right? So hopefully that's through concrete evidence. We are anticipating hopefully that job description analysis and coming in and us creating those interview questions to help practice can allow us to practice how we are articulating and communicating our thoughts, our experiences, our examples. But that nonverbal is also really important as well. And so the nice thing about practicing with someone else is that they can help maybe point out some of the things that we do. One of the things that we also offer in our department is simulated mock interviews through Maricopa CareerLink. And the nice feature about that is you could actually record yourself. And I always say, like, if you have the opportunity to record yourself, so if it's not through MCL, I've had people share with me that they'll just put up their phone, flip it around, and then they'll hit the play button and then record themselves responding. Because there's nothing like being able to see yourself firsthand. And, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I, play with my hair a lot. Or, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I use these filler words all the time. So there's something about practicing with somebody else that will help you hopefully identify and then practice to overcome or get better at those things, because we're more aware of it, right? I know that I used to be when it came to interviews, I'm a very handsy talker in general. That's something that I've had to be more mindful of. I'm also a naturally fast talker. And so I always, through practicing and practicing out loud, I really kind of had to learn how to pace myself and take pauses when I want to say ums and buts all the time, because that's just what I do naturally. So I've learned to, be aware of that and just take a pause if I need to take a pause. So doing that practice, I think, would hopefully help and be beneficial. And then I'm also, like, personally, when I practice for interviews, I do like to do mock interviews with, my husband or a family member or somebody. But I also am very guilty of driving in my car, and if they ask me this question and I'm driving, and it probably looks like I'm talking to myself in the car, but literally up until the interview, like, that's what I do. Or if I'm getting ready in the morning, like, and I'm in front of a mirror, while I'm curling my hair or doing whatever, like, I'm talking to myself out loud. So it's just something that I always do. I try not to get super scripted, but I at least know the talking points, and however it comes out, but at least every time I'm just trying to be more clear and more concise. So I guess to kind of sum it up is, when it comes to interview, like, you need to practice somehow, because you can do the prep, you can do the job description analysis, and you can do all that and be great. But if you're not actually like articulating and vocalizing it out loud, it's really hard for somebody to get better at something. So like Laura and Dakota mentioned, practice with a friend or family member, come in and schedule an appointment and see us. Because doing those things, or recording yourself either through Maricopa CareerLink or through your camera, like, doing those things, hopefully you become aware of those verbal and also nonverbal things that you're doing that, sometimes when we're nervous, we're just unaware of what we do, but being able to.
I'm guilty of that too. I'm guilty of like practicing like as I'm getting ready, or if I'm like driving, or if I'm like cooking, you know what I mean? Just like, 'cause I want those talking points. I want to make sure that I'm hitting the talking points. So yeah, it's really important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
tip for memorization, sorry, really quick, is so if you do it right before bed and you're kind of looking over things and then you go to bed, sleeping actually helps you memorize things. So I used to do that in college. I would study and then I would take a nap, and then I would study and take a nap, because sleeping actually lets you memorize that stuff because it goes straight into your brain afterwards. So if you do it right before bed, it'll help you memorize those things a little bit easier.
Help you retain. Good to know. So if I want to try to remember something, I'll do something at night and hopefully I'll retain it longer.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about are interview questions that you have the opportunity to ask. Remember that interviews are two-way streets. We talked about this in another video. This is your opportunity to make sure that you are also gathering information to make sure that this is going to be the best decision that you can make, right? So not only that the position is going to be a fit, but maybe the company, the department, or the team is going to be a good fit for you. So that's why it's extremely critical for us to take advantage of the end of every interview, because at the end of every interview, the employer will typically ask, do you have any questions for us? And so what you should be doing is, one, asking questions, but prepare what types of questions you want to ask beforehand. I always feel like when people are like, no, I don't have any questions at this time, it's just such a missed opportunity. And employers want to hear that you're asking questions because they want to know that you're interested and that you're engaged. So definitely do some preparation beforehand, and hopefully doing that research on the company website and whatever you found on social media, that might help generate some interview questions. But if not, what are some tips maybe that we can leave to our viewers that might help them come up with interview questions? Are there questions that you really like to ask at the end, or that you recommend individuals ask towards the end of an interview?
Sorry. I think that it's really good to have like 5 or 6 questions in your mind of what you want to ask, because you could be going through the interview and suddenly one of those questions was answered and you don't want to re-ask the question. Mm-hmm. So you might only ask 2 to 3 questions, and that's a really good number, but always make sure you have way more prepped, because maybe they will already answer. My favorite one is, what does a day look like for someone in this position? They might already answer that. Or does this position have room for growth? That's another one that's a good one. But they might answer that question for you. So you want to make sure that you have way more already in your mind that you could ask just in case.
Mm-hmm. I think that's I think asking 2 to 3 is a really good number. I think having more, you're right, is great, because if they are asking it along the way, the last thing you're like, okay, they asked, they answer that one, I have no questions. So probably having more is really good. But if you're at the point where none of them have been asked and you have 5 to 6, I wouldn't say ask 5 to 6 questions. I think 2 to 3 is probably like the sweet spot of how many questions you want to ask. And then you also want to read the room, right? Like if you notice that people are kind of looking antsy, then maybe, okay, this is my last question, or kind of follow their lead. But they'll always have the opportunity, or you'll always have the opportunity to typically ask a question at the end. What about you, Laura? Any kind of suggestions?
So I think that we also need to consider how much time we have during the interview, because if it's a 30-minute interview, we want to make sure that we're answering the questions that are asked in the interview, plus we want to ask our questions in the interview. So when I'm helping somebody, it's kind of hard to determine, first of all, like, what do you want to know about this position? And I think everyone's different when they're considering like what questions that they need to ask. So for instance, like what do you want to know about the job? What is unclear to you? Read the job description, because you don't want to ask questions that you can easily find either in the job description or like on a website, because then it looks like you didn't do your research. It looks like you didn't look at the job description, or you didn't go on the website. So you want to find out particularly about the job opportunities. So maybe what is the company culture like? Maybe you want to ask, like in 6 months, where do you need to be as far as your skill set? Maybe if the company is doing projects, are you going to be involved in it? What are they doing? And then maybe even asking the interviewer questions about why they like to be, maybe like why do they like working there or something. Because I feel like the more questions that you ask, and like Dakota mentioned, and like what you also mentioned, Isel, the 2 to 3 questions I think is a good amount, because like I said, be mindful of the time, but also you don't want to ask questions like, how much am I going to get paid? Do I have vacation time? Because those aren't the appropriate questions to ask. And you don't want the interviewer to think that that's really all that you're after is like the pay and the vacation. But if professional development is important to you, maybe ask about those questions, because I know that's important to me as well. So it's really up to the individual to kind of determine, what they want to know about the job. Because, I think in the back of your mind, you might have some reservations about it, but you want to be able to ask questions, ask it in the question where, it's, where they can answer it for you, and you don't want to go into a job opportunity where you don't really know much about. And I was helping someone that long ago. They didn't have a job description, and they said, well, when we get to the interview, we'll talk about the job. And I don't think that's a very good, I think that's kind of like a signal of like, maybe you don't really want to interview for this type of company. But you want to, even if you're in that situation, have lots of questions, because if you don't know what you're interviewing for, you need to have a lot of questions that you want to be able to ask. So those are my tips on, what you should do when you have an interview and you need to ask your questions.
Yeah.
Because literally you are interviewing the company at that point.
Yeah. And like we said, it's a two-way street. So you need to get the information that you need to make sure that, at the end of the day, it's going to be a position that you are really wanting and you would be happy and satisfied in, and also a company and a team that you would want to be a part of. The last thing you want to do is get into a position and then completely regret it. So get the information, ask the questions, that'll help you make that decision. So never not ask a question. The types of questions will probably be dependent on what maybe information you feel like you would want to help you make the decision. I'm sure if you were to go to Google and Google like interview questions to ask at the end, like worst case, you could always use or look at those for examples, but really think about what questions you have that aren't currently answered that you really want to know to help you make the decision. But I like that you brought up the points of the questions that you shouldn't be asking. So the salary, the benefits, like that's not a conversation you have at the interview. If you move forward and you get past to a job offer and start working with HR, that's when you start having those conversations. But you're right, that's not the appropriate time to ask those questions. You want them to know who you are and your experiences and all of that. Like that's how you want to utilize that time. So we hope those are some tips and advice. Obviously, we can't cover everything in just a quick short video. So if you have any questions, if you'd like help with interviewing, if you'd like to schedule a mock interview with our office, feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email, and we'd be happy to help you practice with interviewing and even maybe help you identify some questions that you want to ask in your next interview. So with that, we'll sign off. We hope to see you guys later. Bye.